Awesome.
All right, I guess we'll get started. So this is number 3 of our monthly um, zoominess of this month in our native gardens. And this event is, or Zoom is hosted by St. Louis Wild Ones. And afterwards, you can go onto their YouTube page and there'll be a recording of this presentation so you can look at it later to um, so you don't have to remember everything today. My next slide. There we go. All right, so this presentation is kind of loosely based on a book I wrote called the Wildflower Garden Planner. And there's these floating around at Wild Ones events. And we will sort of be going over the March chapter today, but you don't need a book to follow along. You can just you can take notes in your book, or you can take notes on a piece of paper. So March, we have bluebells starting to bloom. I haven't actually seen any bluebells blooming, but on Facebook, I see that there are bluebells blooming somewhere in Missouri. So soon, there will be bluebells soon. And so I start my March chapter with this bluebell drawing, and I encourage you, even if you're bad at drawing, to try drawing a bluebell and color it in. They have like these different, the shading from purple to pink is a lot of fun to draw. So give it a shot. You don't have to show it to anyone. So this month we're going to be going over signs of spring, and Brenda Adams is here and she's going to talk to us some about her favorite places to see wildflowers. Then I will be talking a little bit about transplanting. It's transplanting season. We'll talk about spring rains that become spring floods. One of my favorite topics is eat the spring weeds, like the dandelions and the violets. Every month we have talked about pulling honeysuckle, but this is a good month to pull honeysuckle. I have an ode to the violet. We'll talk about some spring shrubs. We have Joe here too. He's going to talk about bluebird nest boxes. And then we have a little quiz at the end if we have time. So first, the harbinger of spring is one of the first blooming flowers. I was seeing this back in mid-February because it has been so warm, but I know that they are still out there blooming. So go look for those. It's not the first flower, but it's the first herbaceous plant to bloom, I think, because I know that witch hazels have been blooming for months now and still are blooming. They're so easy to find right now. You just walking and then all of a sudden you smell that like cotton candy and then you like follow it to the nearest witch hazel. So my yard actually doesn't have too many spring plants because it's very sunny. Um, but I know there are some beautiful shade gardens in St. Louis with beautiful spring displays, but most of the time I go out into the woods to find my spring flowers. And one of my favorite places to go is St. Francis, which I'm going to be visiting in a week or two here. I also like to go to Washington State Park. They have this Thousand Steps Trail, and it's the best place to see Blue-eyed Mary. So when Blue-eyed Mary's blooming, go do the Thousand Steps Trail. And there are 1,000 steps too. I like Young Conservation Area, the area just below the parking lot down by the creek. There's tons of bluebells down there, and the celandine poppy. Rockwoods Reservation has a nice variety of wildflowers, especially down in the bottomlands near the creek. Valley View Glades I really like. They have Indian paintbrush and hoary cocoon and some of those weird flowers you don't see so much, but those usually bloom a little bit later than the forest flowers. The forest wildflowers have to get started fast because they need to do all their thing before the trees leaf out. So I would go visit these first four and then visit Valley View Glades later. And then Brenda here added a couple of places that I am not as familiar with. And so, do you want to talk about those, Brenda?
Sure. Zombie Trail, one year I was looking for a good place to view Virginia bluebells, and a friend says, let's go to Zombie Trail. I had never been there. Um, and if you like a place that's paved, uh, fairly safe, local, you don't have to drive very far to get to it. It's a great place. As you go down the trail, you'll find lots of spring ephemerals. And then all of a sudden you'll open up and the whole bottomland will be nothing but bluebells. It's just absolutely amazing. Um, but you have to not mind bikes because there are a lot of bikers there. It actually connects to a lot of other trails. Um, so you could keep going forever, but we usually go down and then back up because it's paved. A lot of people like it because you don't have to worry about ticks and chiggers and things like that. Um, it's also known as the Rock Hollow Greenway, but most of the locals call it Zombie Trail.
It sounds
Uh,
cooler.
if you want to see some nice Virginia bluebells, it is fantastic. Um, so Salt Lick is in Ballmeyer, Illinois. Um, it's It actually has two trails. One goes along the bottomland, which is what you want to visit in March because it's got all the spring ephemerals. But you can also climb up to the top of the bluff, and there they have some glades and things like that for later in the year. Um, I'll have some pictures later for that area. It is really beautiful. Engelman Woods. I love Engelman Woods. It's one of the few remaining old growth forests in Missouri. It's out by St. Labadee. It used to be owned by Missouri Botanical Garden, and they gave it to the Missouri Department of Conservation. Basically, you start up on the ridge and you go down into the bottomlands. Bottomlands are just covered with spice bush and other spring ephemerals. It's absolutely gorgeous. Um, and then you head back up out of that area and you get to see the difference on which plants prefer that bottomland, that rich bottomland, and which plants would actually do better as you go up the slope where there's more drainage and it's a little bit drier. So it's a great place to see that variety of plants. And then Shaw Nature Reserve. Whitmire Garden is one of my favorite gardens, but it's not where I would go to see spring ephemerals. But if you go to the trail house area, you can take some trails that go down to the river, and there you'll find lots of spring ephemerals. The first time I didn't actually see the flower there, but I saw the plant. I had never seen the Miami mist in the wild, and I got to see what would soon be the Miami mist there. And the last one, hmm?
They have nice bluebells at Shaw Nature Reserve in the bottoms too. Pretty good
Yeah,
display there.
yeah, it's very nice. And then Emmenegger Park. For me, it's one of the most convenient parks. I live in Webster. It's in Kirkwood. Um, and it's a great park. You will see glades as you climb up the hill, but then when you come back down into the bottoms, you're going to start seeing spice bush, pawpaw, um, lots of spring ephemerals, including blue-eyed Marys, rue anemone, Dutchman's breeches, um, a lot of spring ephemerals there. So that's also a very nice park, very easy to get to, local. Um, so those were the ones I added to the list.
All right, if anybody has any other suggestions, you can just put them in the chat and we'll read those later. But I think now we're going to look at Brenda's pictures of flowers here.
Yeah, so for me, there's a lot of value in seeing where plants grow. Um, it helps me to understand what its ideal growing conditions are, where you'll find it in nature. And when I look at a plant now and bring it into my garden, I try to picture it in nature, and I try to think what area of my garden best mimics those growing conditions. So I found it very helpful to go out into nature, witness these things, and think about them. And spring is my favorite time to go out. Again, there's not so many ticks and chiggers and things like that, and the spring ephemerals are just absolutely amazing. So the first two pictures I want to share from last year, exactly a year ago, are from Shaw Nature Reserve, and it's the harbinger of spring. And this plant I had never actually seen um, growing, so I was surprised to find hepatica, which some people call the windflower. So it kind of reminds me almost of bloodroot or some of those types of flowers. It's very beautiful. And then March 22nd of last year, I went to Engelman Woods. And these pictures are, of course, bloodroot, um, Dutchman's breeches. And then I found this really interesting log. Um, so there's more than just flowers to see in the woods. You know, there's a lot of interesting pieces of nature. I just love the shape of it. And then you see the Adam and Eve orchid. These leaves will soon disappear. And if you remember where they are, you can come back later and actually see the orchid when it sprouts up.
I've always felt that the orchid leaves were more impressive than the orchid flower in Adam and Eve. It's just
You
not
really have to
spectacular.
hunt to see the actual flower. Um, so here is just one of our native ferns, the fragile fern. And then the spring beauty. Unfortunately, that cute little beetle on it, I don't believe is a native beetle, unfortunately. Um, and then the next one is the cutleaf toothwort. So here's when I was talking about at Engelman Woods that the whole bottomland was just full of spice bush. Here you can actually see it. It's absolutely beautiful. And again, you have the Dutchman's breeches, the false rue anemone. And I don't know if people know the difference between the false rue and the rue anemone. Um, when I'm in the woods, I tend to find the false rue more often. It tends to be more of a colonizing plant, where the rue anemone tends to be a singular plant. So I tend to see these more. And then, of course, the beauty of our native mosses is absolutely amazing. And Bessa put these three yellow flowers side by side. So the first one is a native yellow violet, which I don't tend to see. I see the purple violets and white violets a lot, but I don't tend to see the yellow. Um, and the next one is the celandine poppy, and that's put up against the native buttercup, or one of the native buttercups. So they look similar, but you can see there's a difference. And if you look at the buttercup, see how shiny it is, which is very different than the poppy. And of course, we have the May apples in with a water leaf. Some people know the water leaf plants as woolen breeches. And at Salt Lick Point, I think I've found at least 3 different types of water leaf plants. Um, and it won't be long before they're blooming from this picture.
I
And
think
then
that the water leaf's kind of an underappreciated ground cover for shade too. You don't see it for sale that often, but it does a great job as a ground cover, and it has
You know,
those cool spots.
yeah, I don't know that I've ever seen it for sale. Have I?
I,
Um,
Shaw Nature Reserve sells it sometimes.
oh, do they? Oh, okay.
I
I used
bought
to
it,
have,
Brenda.
huh?
I bought it last year
Oh, did you?
from Missouri Wildflowers. Yeah,
Oh, okay. So they are starting to sell it then.
it's
I used to have,
uncommon.
yes, uncommon. I used to have one the just plain green leaf one in my yard, and it moved around my garden for many years, and then finally didn't come back. Um, so it tends to be one of those plants that moves around, similar to the cardinal plant, or at least the cardinal plant moves around a lot in my garden. Um, then our native trillium, and of course, everyone's favorite, or at least my favorite, the wild ginger. It makes one of the best ground covers around. And at Salt Lick Point, you can see again some more of the spice bush. And I don't know if you can see all those rocks in the background. They have some huge rocks there. It's really fun to go look and see what's growing amongst the rocks and what's going on there. And then Bessa put the three white flowers together. Uh, of course, we have the cutleaf toothwort, the Dutchman's breeches, and then a fairly large patch of the false rue anemone. And the Dutchman's breeches does actually have a sister that's native to Missouri called, what is it, squirrel corn. The leaves are the same, but the flowers look more like hearts, like a bleeding heart almost, versus the Dutchman's breeches.
Is the squirrel corn yellow or is it white?
Uh, I've seen pictures of it white. I haven't
Okay.
seen pictures of it yellow. Um, so I'm not sure. You might be thinking of, is it Corydalus that's the yellow?
Yeah. I have to look up all my spring ephemerals again every year because I forget before the next spring.
Oh, but it's fun to look them up. They're great.
Yes.
And then even in March, you're going to find some of the butterflies out. This is the gray hair streak butterfly. And you can see some of the, this is the end of March here. You can see some of the Virginia bluebells. And if you look up, you can see that that hillside is going to be full of them once they're in full bloom. And then the white trout lily. I have the yellow trout lily in my garden. So it was fun for me to find a white trout lily. And then you'll see the different native ferns. This is the walking fern. You'll see them in a lot of different of these parks. So anyway, Wild Ones, St. Louis chapter is kicking off its pilot wildflower walk, where we'll visit some of these beautiful Missouri locations and observe the native plants. Um, if there's enough interest, then we will continue to schedule them. Bessa made this informational flyer for our first wildflower walk for 10 a.m. March 26th at St. Francis State Park, the Swimming Deer Trail. The sign up for these walks will be through Dig In on the website. An announcement will go out when it's available. This is our first trial run, so if you're interested or have any thoughts or suggestions you want to make or that you'd like to share with me, you can send me a message through the Contact Us on the St. Louis Chapter Wild Ones page. We anticipate walks will be limited to 10 to 15 people, depending on the location, the width of the paths, things like that. I myself have never walked the Swimming Deer Trail. Bessa has. She's the one who came up with this location. If you want to say something about it, Bessa.
Yeah, this is a really nice walk. You kind of start out in the bottomlands. There's lots of bluebells. And you start off on a pretty level grade. And then at the end, you can go up a hill where there's different flowers like Miami Mist up there. But if you don't like hills, you can just turn around and come back on the level walkway too. So it has options for every level of hiking. And also, like, this is a hike I do every year. It's a really nice spring display. Although St. Francis is a little bit of a drive from St. Louis. But I'll be there, and Brenda will be there, and the flowers will be there.
Yeah, it's
So,
15 minutes from Webster Groves, so not too far.
So here's some flowers from my walk at St. Francis at the same time period. This was 2 years ago. But so we have some bloodroot down here with their little leaves clasped around their stem. Lots of bluebells like this. More toothwort. This plant is an American Columbo, which isn't blooming, but it's an interesting plant. You don't see that one as many places. And we also have the Spring Beauty, Celandine Poppy, the Adam and Eve Orchid. This is the Cordalis, right?
Yes.
And then over here is Jacob's Ladder. So those are things I saw 2 years ago and took pictures of that weren't blurry. So I'm very good at the blurry pictures. So this is my favorite quote for the springtime because we're all usually with lots of mud around and crawling in it in order to look at these tiny little flowers, but they are so beautiful and help us realize that it's spring. So we'll stop for some questions for a little bit. I saw,
Yes,
where's Teresa?
I am
Who's our
here.
question master.
Yes.
Master of questions.
We have one question and one comment in the chat. The first one is Kathy's comment that the Silver Mines Recreational Area and Millstream Gardens Conservation Area both have good spring wildflowers.
Yeah, I love that hike from Millstream to Silver Mines and back. It's even further away and more challenging hike. But if you are up for it, definitely do it. That's beautiful wildflowers. And Millstream Gardens is just gorgeous.
Then we do have a question from Deb. Could you say again where to look for the announcement? She's ready to sign up. And she's also wondering, is it a relatively easy walk and is a walking stick needed?
Well, the sign up when we have it up and running will be in Dig In. But like I said, if you want to make sure your name gets on it, you can go to Contact Us and then just choose my name, Brenda Adams, and just say, hey, I want to get on the list. And I'll make sure you get on the list whenever we get the Dig In set up.
I would say it's a fairly easy walk, and it starts off at the easiest and ends at its hardest. So if at any time, and it's a 3 mile hike, which probably normally you can do 3 miles in 2 hours, but it might take us 3 hours because we're going to be looking at the flowers. Although we're not going to stand around much, right, Brenda? We're going to keep moving.
Which is why we want to limit the number of people so that everyone can get a chance to see it and take pictures if they want or whatever, but it won't take us 5 hours to get through.
Yeah. And I always recommend bringing a hiking stick. Like, they're great. You can poke things with them. You can have them, like, you can hold plants out of the way while you're taking photos of other things. You can check how deep this creek is before you step across it. So bring your hiking stick. All right, we're gonna move on to transplanting. Thank you, Brenda, for sharing with us. And we'll see you all at St. Francis.
Yeah, thanks.
So right now, March, good time to transplant stuff. So I like to look for when things first start coming up. Like sometimes those ferns are coming up and they're just like sticking their little nub out of the ground. And that is the best time to transplant them. And other things like the Solomon seal, ginger. I think the ginger's in like the little tiny mouse ear stage. Now is a good time to go dig them up, and then you can move them to other places in your yard if you need to spread out your populations or share your plants with somebody else. Or go dig up somebody else's plants and share them into your own yard. And so you want to do that before they get very big, or else your chance of damaging them is pretty severe, especially if those ferns have, like if the leaves fully come out, they fall off so easily. So things that you can transplant, the things you should transplant first would be all your ferns, ginger, Solomon seal, trilliums, bluebells, celandine poppy, bloodroot. And you do those right now because they're going to start growing the fastest. So start with them. End the season maybe with asters and goldenrods because they are last to bloom, but probably still need to be transplanted and moved around. Especially if you have one mature garden bed and then you're starting a new garden bed, don't buy plants, just go transplant your old ones and spread them out. So when I'm digging up things, I take like one of those pitchforks and stick it in under the plant, the whole clump, go all the way around and just sort of lift the entire clump out. And then I might need to spray some water on it, but I just gently kind of pull it apart. And this works for big clumps of grass. This plant here that's been dug out is a shining blue star. And you just somewhat wrestle, but gently try to get it apart. And then you take the clumps and you can plant them out again. And while you're wrestling your plant, you should make sure that you're not letting the roots dry out. Like either have like a spritzer with you so you can spritz them, or maybe put some loose soil over them, put a damp cloth over them. But if the roots dry out too much, it's going to kill your plants. Also, if you're transplanting stuff, don't half transplant and then go eat lunch and then try to plant it later. Do it all at once. Give yourself enough time to dig it out and replant it all at the same time. When you put things back in, especially like ginger, it's so tangly that it's hard to get soil back in all the little crevices. So I like to sprinkle like a little layer of soil, like finely crumbled soil over the top, and then water it into the crevices and just keep watering it until the water stops soaking in so much. And sometimes I actually get like a spoon or something and poke it into the crevice to get the soil in there and make sure you don't want air bubbles under the soil because that will dry out your roots. And water all those things that you freshly transplanted because there's a thing called transplant shock. And it's like when you have you go into shock from having a leg amputated. The plants are feeling that way too. So be nice to them. But if you do it early in the spring, the plants recover and then you have more plants. So it's a cheap way to get more plants. Another thing for March is landscaping to stop erosion. This is an excerpt from the March chapter. So here is a picture of erosion in my yard here. So I have this area where the street comes to the driveway and the water, instead of having it go down my driveway and towards the foundation of my house, I've made this little canal here for it to come off the street. You can't see where I'm pointing, right here. And so the water comes down here and goes into my yard and then it comes out. So these are sort of connected. This is looking uphill and this is looking downhill. But so it comes here and it goes through this little maze of paths and into a boggy area that I planted over here with a bunch of sedges. And this just keeps the water that runs off the street away from my house. It's away from the neighbor's house over here. And it can absorb into the ground right there in the middle. So that is just when it's raining, be ready for flooding. Go shepherd your water. Go stand in your yard with your umbrella and watch where the water's going and try to put it to the best use. If you don't want to just shunt it off of your property, you want it to go onto your property, but not into your basement or your neighbor's basement. Save it for your plants for later. Because you know in summer they're going to want that water. And so in spring, I like to eat my spring greens. This is one of my favorite topics in spring is eating the weeds. So a lot of those colonists brought us a lot of special weeds over with them. They're not native plants because they're post-colonization, but they are naturalized most places. So like this dandelion here, we have dandelion greens, which are edible, dandelion flower heads, also edible. And when they're young, they taste pretty good and they're very healthy for you. Down here we have henbit, which is another introduced weed that is naturalized, and you can eat that too, or you can feed it to your livestock. Other plants, I have some mint here, some cilantro. This is parsley that survived the winter. I have some kale over here. Now this is henbit. This is dead nettle. And those onions that grow on your lawn. And then also, this is native violet. Leaves and flowers are edible. And redbud flowers are also edible. Redbud's actually a bean. So I like to go out with my weeds, whether they're native or not, and I mix them with some like green leaf lettuce. And then I make myself a spring salad, and it's very pretty and fresh, and I can feel like I'm a colonist surviving my first winter in America. So that's probably what they were eating too, or they're making it into soup or something. March is a good time to pull more honeysuckle. So this is what honeysuckle looks like right now. These little green things are starting to make that green haze in the woods that you see along the highways. So go out, pull it up. Usually it is a good time to pull it up because the soil is nice and loose and wet right now, but it's so dry still. Like I tried pulling a couple and they weren't budging. So hopefully we're gonna get some rain in the next couple of days. I hope. And then we can go pull our honeysuckle. This month is called Honeysuckle Sweep Month. The Botanical Garden named it that. And there are lots of events being hosted around St. Louis where you can go to honeysuckle. And so if you have honeysuckle in your yard and you aren't quite sure how the best way to get rid of it, you can go to one of these events and they will teach you how to get rid of it and you can practice. And then you go home and pull your own honeysuckle. So I encourage you to participate in Honeysuckle Sweep Month. And you can find this on the Missouri Botanical Garden website in the Sustainability Biodiversity section of that website. So earlier I was mixing up henbit and dead nettle. So here I get this question a lot, is how to tell your creeping Charlie from your henbit from your dead nettle. And none of these are native. They're all mints. They have square stems. If you roll the stem, you can kind of see it right here. So they have a square stem. They have purple flowers. They're fuzzy leaved. So Creeping Charlie is one that kind of creeps along the ground. It's a trailing vine over the ground. When you're trying to pull it out, like if you leave any of those nodes, they'll just sprout back up again. It's a very frustrating plant to kill. And it also has this like musty smell about it. Usually if you step on it, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's Creeping Charlie. And I'm not sure if Creeping Charlie is edible. If anybody knows, let me know. So this next one here is henbit, which is my favorite one to eat of the three of these. Although none of them, they're all fuzzy. I'm not really big on eating fuzzy things. They have too much texture for me. But so the henbit, it has blooms that are on like throughout the plant in every little leaf node area. They also have more lobes in their leaves. And they're generally like a clump. Usually when you try to pull them out, it like takes an equal amount of soil out of the ground too. So they're very heavy. And then the dead nettle, which is this one on the far right, it has these bigger leaves and they are kind of shingled down the plant. Like it almost doesn't want water at its right base. And then the flowers are usually all at the top. And dead nettle is often the tallest of these plants. And you'll see it out in fields, like farm fields. They're kind of a purple color. That's usually the dead nettle out there. And you can also eat dead nettle, although the name is a little bit alarming. But it is even fuzzier than the henbit, so I've tried it. It was too fuzzy for me. I've tried feeding these all to my rabbit, and he is not into mint. Mint is not, deer generally don't like mint either, so being a mint is a good adaptation to not being eaten, unless it's humans, so humans like mint. Maybe you can make mojitos out of these. They might be horrible though, so don't take my word for that. That other purple thing in our yards, the violet, is I went to a talk one time when I was in college, and the whole talk was about how to kill violets in your lawn. And then I grew up to be a native plant bum, and now I love violets. But violets still, they can like push out your other native plants. So if I let the violets just grow, I would probably have a violet monoculture in my yard, which, I mean, is better than a lawn, but I rather have diversity of wildflowers in my yard. But another great thing about violets is that you can eat all of it. Like the leaves are really great. They have vitamin C. You can throw some in your salad. The flowers you can eat. You can make yourself a little violet necklace and then you can eat it like those candy necklaces. Also, you can make yourself all sorts of alcoholic concoctions out of violets, violet syrups. People will take the pretty little purple violet flower and press it and then coat it in sugar and a little violet candy, and they use those at really fancy restaurants and they put them on their cakes. So you can pretend you're very hoity-toity with your violet candies. Or you can just admire your violets. I think I'm a violet grazer, so I'll be out, pulling up dandelions or something, and I'll be munching on the violets. And violets are also an important host plant for some of our butterflies. And they also are good cover for all sorts of birds that are living in there. Good ground cover. Spring blooming shrubs. So this first one here is I think that's a serviceberry. And then we have another witch hazel. Witch hazel's been blooming forever. And then you can see my non-native magnolia here is just starting to bloom back here. It's a very silly magnolia. It blooms way too early in the year. But the witch hazels and the serviceberry are prepared to be snowed on and still live, unlike the silly magnolias. Most of these plants are really important for spring pollinators, like all those little tiny bees and flies are waking up in the warm weather. They come out, they need something to eat. Like bumblebees that overwintered in your lawn are coming out, they need to make their colonies, so you gotta feed them, give them something to eat. Spice bush, which Brenda mentioned several times, is a great spring flower. And I was at that partners talk that was earlier today, and they were talking about spice bush being an underappreciated food plant. Now, I've eaten spice bush berries and they are strong. So in spice bush in moderation, I guess, use it in cooking instead of just eating it straight. But I do love to smell the like broken stems, smell the leaves. The flowers are pretty, the bees find them addicting. And spice bush is the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail butterfly, which is this guy here. These photos are not mine, I stole them off the internet. But this is a spice bush butterfly here. He's got these fake eye spots to scare things off. And then they become this beautiful spice bush swallowtail. But you have to provide for the caterpillars if you want the butterflies. Or get your neighbors to plant a spice bush, and then they can grow the caterpillars and you can have the butterflies. Or both. We both need a spice bush. Wild plums are my favorite spring tree. I have 3 of the Mexican plum. That's this third one here. We actually have these 5 different native plums. And last month we talked about oaks and how important they are for insects and wildlife. And plums are the second most important plant to put in your yard for caterpillars that feed birds. So I know that I get lots of damage on my leaves from the plums, but they keep living. They don't seem to mind. And they bloom. They smell so good. Like my plums are in far other side of my yard, and I can smell them from my house. They are so scented. And also, like if you get within like 20 feet of the plum tree, you can hear the hum from all the bees. And I like to go like just stick my head in the plum tree because all the bees are drunk and they're just like flying all around my head, and the smell is so great and the bees sound so cool, and just lose myself in the plum tree. So I recommend a plum tree. The wild plum, this one at the top, Prunus americana, is the easiest one to find. But if you can find any of these other guys here, you might as well have one of each. I mean, I have, well, so I need to get, I don't have a wild plum. I don't have a goose plum, but I have these other 3 here. So get some of each. I chose the Mexican plum because it has the biggest plum fruit, and I like to make things with it. And it also feeds lots of birds and raccoons and skunks. They like the plums too. So these March is a good time to clean up your bird houses. And so these are some houses. I've got some insect hotels here. That's these guys with the holes in them. You need to clean them out in the spring. I have this little nesting box here, and then this bluebird box, which I painted a bluebird on, which probably wasn't the best idea. I would think if I were a bluebird and trying to find a house and there was a bluebird painted on the house, that might scare me off. I don't know. But we have an expert here, Joe Corio, that actually knows how to attract bluebirds to his house, and I'm hoping he'll get on here and talk a little bit more about bluebirds. I've actually never seen a bluebird in my yard, but I was at somebody else's yard last week and they had bluebird. So that was nice. Where is Joe?
Can you hear me?
Oh, there you are. I see you now.
Okay,
Can you
so
share it?
yeah, so the male bluebirds are arriving now in St. Louis area. St. Louis is the northernmost range in Missouri of where we have bluebirds year round. So some of you may have seen bluebirds during the winter months. Yeah, they're especially attracted to water during the winter. So if you have a heated bird bath, that will surely bring in the bluebirds. They will not come to your feeders normally. They're not seed eaters. They will accept some suet during the winter time. They're dried fruit. They love mealworms, and dried mealworms are appreciated for the bluebirds also. But now is the time. The males arrive first. So if you have seen them, and if you do have a house up, you may have seen them sitting on the house. So the males select the housing site, but the female has to approve it. So just because he found the place doesn't mean there's going to be a nest there. If she doesn't like it, they'll move on and try to find another place. So if you do have a house, let me see if I can get this to work. I'm going to try sharing my screen here. Oops, that didn't work.
So I do have a bluebird house in my yard, but I only get house sparrows in it, which I don't like.
Can you see that?
Yeah, you want to put it on slideshow? There you go.
Okay, so if you have a bluebird house, now is a great time to clean them out and get ready for the upcoming nesting season. This is one of the bluebird houses on our trail, and you can see it was used last year, and it was used a lot. And this is perfectly acceptable for a clean house. What I do is sometimes they will use them. The birds that stay over the winter, they will use them during the winter just to get out of the weather. But this time of year, if there's any nesting material left, you'll want to clean that out. I usually take a dry paintbrush and just sweep it out. If there is material to the walls, you can take like a putty knife or a plastic scraper and scrape it down. And if you really want to be a clean freak, you can take a 10% bleach solution and spray it down. Although that's typically not necessary, but if you did have a nest that had maybe ants in it or parasites the year before, it might be a good idea to do that. So, but this is perfectly acceptable as a bluebird house that's ready for another season of occupancy. One of the probably most asked questions I get is where should I put my bluebird house? And the best answer is you want to put it in an open area. They like open areas. You want to mount it on a metal pole, if at all possible. And you want it to be kind of away from a lot of heavy brush or woody area. Some of the purists will tell you that the opening should be facing east to prevent the weather from getting into it. But I always tell people to face it where you can watch it and you can see it and you can enjoy it. Nature isn't going to always provide natural cavities for birds on the east side of a tree. So place it to where you can view and you can see it and you can enjoy the bluebirds. If possible, if you can place it where there is a branch nearby during the nesting season, the male bluebird likes to perch nearby where he can see the opening, especially while the female is incubating the eggs. But the main thing again is put it where you can enjoy it. A metal pole is preferred. I'll have people tell me that they have a bluebird house and they've never had bluebirds in it. And one of the first questions I ask them is it mounted on a tree? So never say never, but bluebirds are not likely to go to a nest box that's mounted on a tree. It's just too susceptible to predation. So with the metal pole, this will not prevent a snake or a raccoon from getting into it, but it will deter them to the point. And I have, let's see, about 60 houses that I monitor each year, and I have never had an issue with a snake or a raccoon climbing up one of these poles. This pole here in the picture is actually, it's called a U post. So if you look down on it, it's shaped like a U, and it has a flat side, and I can put that against the house and bolt the house to it. There are T-post mount. If you have a T-post, this is one that is pretty neat. I have a couple of houses with one like this, and it just slips over the top of a T-post. What's nice about this one is you can take it off very easily. The house will just lift up and off, and if you want to do a better job of cleaning it, or if you want to relocate it, you can do that also. If you want a little bit of a more formal look, there's a T-post mount. It's just a plastic cap that will sit on top of the T-post, and it mounts to the bottom of the house, and it just gives you a little prettier appearance for mounting a bluebird house. So the people tell me, yeah, I put it in a tree, and this is usually what happens when it's in a tree. The squirrels find it, and of course they can't get in that little hole, so they make it larger. The bluebirds will probably not use this because it's very easy for a raccoon to get in there and stick his arm in there and take the eggs or take the babies. So you will get birds. You will get chickadees. You'll get wrens if you put it on a tree like this, but you're unlikely to get a bluebird. Any questions on that? If you don't have any questions, I think that's pretty much all I had on the bluebirds.
There just became a question.
Yeah.
Kathy's question is, my bee motel that you made still has many occupied holes. I assume it is safe to clean the unoccupied holes without disturbing the occupied ones. What are you using to clean them out with?
Or are we talking about the insect hotel?
Yeah, bee motel.
Yeah. I would wait a little bit longer before cleaning it out. I would wait until probably June timeframe when you're sure all the bees have left. And then I just use a piece of wire and just stick them through the cavities. Or a lot of the ones I make, I just use bamboo. You can take the bamboo out and just replace it if you want to do that. But in the ones I made, I have pine cones in there. I'll have sometimes sugar. I can't think of the name. Gumball trees. I'll put the gumballs in there. Just anything with cavities. I use bamboo, pine cones, things like that. So if they're really clogged and dirty, you can just pull them out and replace them with new pine cones and new material.
Yeah, and
Right.
the ones that are drilled in a block of wood, you can use pipe cleaners, or they have tiny little bottle brushes for cleaning out your water bottles. Those work pretty well for the bee houses.
Yeah, I just usually use a piece of wire first to break the big material up, and you can even squirt it out with a stream of water too if you don't have a little brush.
You have another question from Laura. Laura wants to know, what are typical nesting materials used by bluebirds and your thoughts on baffles to discourage predation?
Um, the typical material for bluebirds is they use a lot of grass. So they're going to build a cup-shaped nest. It's going to be primarily of grasses. You may see some cedar, the soft bark off of a cedar tree. You might see that toward the bottom. And then grasses. And then the final material is going to be really fine grass. And then as far as the baffles go, they're fine, but baffles will prevent the raccoons and the snakes from getting into your houses. I don't use them unless I have to have. I absolutely have to. And my feeling on this is nature. So I give the bluebirds a fighting chance by using the metal poles. It's a deterrent, but in nature. But my main reason for not using the baffles is it could add $20 to the cost of each bluebird house. And you're going to have to find, and that's if you make it yourself. If you don't make it yourself, it's probably going to be more than that. So I haven't had a problem where I had to use a baffle. I think before I do, I would move the bluebird house, try relocating it to a different location.
If you relocate it while they are nesting, will they stop nesting?
Now, if they're nesting, you don't want to disturb them. So if you have a problem, the nest will probably have been destroyed, so you can move it at that point in time. And they may come back to that box, but usually if their nest was destroyed, they'll find another location to nest. And in this area, bluebirds, 2 broods, sometimes 3 broods a year, depending on the weather. So if the insects come, bluebirds are going to primarily feed insects to their young. If the insects are here, they'll start nesting.
I have a question for you, Joe. Is there a distance apart that you would want to put your birdhouses? Like, will the bluebirds not nest too close to each other, or do they not mind?
Good question. No, they are territorial. So typically, if you have the space, you're going to want to put them about 300 feet apart, or place them if you have a smaller yard. Place them so if the bird's on their house, they can't see the other house from that location. So you can put one in your front yard, and then you can put one in your backyard with the house blocking the view. But they are territorial. And if you put houses too close, like other birds, especially wrens, they will build nests in both houses just to deter other birds from getting in their territory, but they will only use one nest. And wrens are popular for doing that. And speaking of wrens and chickadees and titmice, any of our native birds, we allow to use the bluebird houses. Typically we're going to see if it's near a wooded area, you're going to probably see chickadees, and the way you'll be able to notice that is they start building their nest out of green moss. So if you see a lot of green moss in the box, it's a chickadee that's coming in. Now the bluebird could come in and say, "Oh no, you're not doing this," and they'll build their nest right on top. So one other important thing, if you do get a nesting pair of bluebirds and they do fledge a brood, it's important to remove the nest after the last birds have fledged. Clean out the box, again, just sweeping it out. And they will come in and they will build a new nest. Otherwise, they will build a new nest on top of the old nest. And then you have a chance of having parasites and ants come in if you leave that old nest in there. Plus, it brings the nest closer to the opening, and it's easier for a raccoon to get in and destroy the nest. Sparrows are the number one enemy of bluebirds. Sparrows will destroy the nest. Sparrows will actually kill bluebirds. So there are specially designed traps for that. Fortunately, we don't have a big sparrow problem where I have my trails. So I've only had, in the 7 or 8 years I've been doing this, only one nest ever destroyed by sparrows.
Well, thanks for sharing that, Joe. And so are these bluebird houses, are they at Crest Farm?
Yes,
So you
we
could
do.
walk around there and see them if people wanted to?
yes, you can. We have a bluebird trail there. There's 40 houses on it. It's about 2.25 miles long. We also sell the bluebird houses there also.
Right, that's it. Crest Farm, which is, what's your closest town?
Hillsborough, it's in Hillsborough, Missouri.
All right. Thank you for answering questions. And will you let me have the screen back?
Yeah. If I can figure out how to do it. Did you get it back?
Nope.
That's so we have about 4 questions for you as well, just to let you know.
All right. Okay, let me get my screen sharing back up again here. All right, just a minute here and I'll get to questions, all right? So I assume you all, being Wild Ones members, have heard about the Partners for Native Landscaping, but there is March 23rd, big event is plant sale at the Maryland Heights Community Center, and I will be there with my books if you want to buy one there. And also there'll be lots of native plants. So, all right, this is my quiz here. All right, so I think just like unmute yourself and say it if you know what this one is down. You can see my mouse, right? Does anybody have a guess?
Yeah, we can see it.
All right,
Dutchman's breeches.
Toothwort?
this one, toothwort.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
That's why I put it next to Dutchman's breeches and Brenda's top, because people get them confused all the time.
Mhm.
What about this one over here?
Spring Beauty.
Yep. We didn't go over this one today.
Looks like Pussy Toes.
Yep, pussy toes. All right, this one's a trick one.
That's a
Bloodroot.
bloodroot.
Yep, it's bloodroot, but with the wrong leaves, because the bloodroot leaf is this tiniest little thing down here. All right, what about this guy here?
Drought lily.
Lily.
Yep. And the last one, which hopefully your faces aren't over.
The
Brilliant.
Trillium.
William.
Good, you guys all passed. You can have spring.
Yay! I'm ready.
So let's go to questions now then.
The first 2 questions were via email. These are from Eileen. The first one is, one of the ongoing questions I have is how to adjust native plant garden design as my knowledge grows. I received plants that were very small and are now awkwardly positioned as they matured. That's the first question.
All right, well, now is a good time to dig them up. If your plants are not where you want them to be, just right now while they're, little, dig them up, move them, divide them. If they're too big for your yard, give them to somebody else who has a bigger yard. Maybe they'll trade with you and give you something that you want. Or maybe you can give them half of your plant and they'll give you half of one of their plants, and then you have twice as many plants. Also, if like a lot of people, they plant things just too close to the sidewalk, so maybe you just cut off the half that's closest to the sidewalk. Like if it's something that you can divide down the middle, like say you're growing little blue stem or something, you just stick your shovel in there and slice it in half, and then do something else with that chunk of little blue stem you cut off.
Second question from Eileen is, she's looking for a good method to create gently curving new border edges on as beds expand.
So my favorite way to lay out beds is to take a garden hose and put it on the lawn where I think the edge of the bed will be. And then I just leave it there for a couple days and fiddle with it until I get it the perfect shape. And then I use that as the guide for digging the bed. I think when you're curving beds, I think curves are always better than straight lines, especially with native plants. But sometimes you need to let the plants tell you how the curve should look. Because like if you have a shrub, you might want to make the curve sort of match the drip line of the shrub. Even if the drip line doesn't come all the way to the ground, it just helps enhance that plant to match the curve of more dominant plant features. And also think about how water is going to move if you're on a hill, and you can try to match your curves to discourage water from going straight downhill. So having more lines that are parallel to the hill than horizontal to the hill. So you might get even more squiggly when you're going downhill with a bed edge.
Uh-oh. Oh, here it is. Sorry, chat. Okay, Kathy has pointed out that rabbits love violets. She lets them grow so that the rabbits could eat them and leave the other flowers alone.
Yep. My pet rabbit really likes violets too.
Barb mentioned that Creeping Charlie is edible, just not in large quantities.
All right. I'm not sure if I'm going to try it though. It smells bad. I might try it. You gotta try everything once.
Then, okay, so this was a little while back. Deb was wondering, did you say again where to look for the announcement? I'm ready to sign up. Oh no, that's okay. That's the one we already saw.
That's one.
Okay, that's all of the questions.
All right. Well, we have hit an hour here, so we will adjourn till next month, and I will try to get the date right on my announcement next month. But in general, we are always the first Wednesday, whether I write that date right or not in the email. And so our next meeting is April 3rd, which I really hope is actually the day. That's probably why I got the 3rd on the emails, because it's the 3rd. So our next meeting, April 3rd, 7 p.m., first Wednesday. And I hope you guys go out and kill some honeysuckle, make your nest boxes ready, transplant your plants, smell the pretty flowers. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you,
night.
Besa. Thank you,
Appreciate
Joe.
you all.
And
Thank you so
thank
much.
you, Barb.
Thank you.